We're going to start the day talking about direct action. Direct action might loosely be defined as the strategic use of immediately effective acts, such as strikes or demonstrations, to achieve a political or social end. Surely it's more than that. How many of you feel that if you've seen one march or one candlelight visual on the 11 o'clock news, you've seen them all? Or know people who feel that way and are not moved by marches or candlelight vigils anymore? When panelist Daniel Hunter agreed to join panelist Jethro Heiko in the campaign against casinos in Philadelphia, Daniel extracted an important promise from Jethro, or so Daniel writes in his book, Strategy and Soul. This is on page 26. But Jethro, promise me we'll keep doing things like the document search and not bland rallies. You mean because no press showed up at Diane's afternoon rally, he asked. No, because the entire action was commonplace. People walked past without a second glance. Promise me we'll only use fresh actions. Document searches, data mining are the most highly covered fax transmission in Philly history. Sure, no boring rallies or marches for us. Promise? I promise, he said, smiling broadly at me. I leaned back in my seat. Over the winding months, our commitment would force us to stay creative and generative, rather than defaulting to actions that are the lowest common denominator. We couldn't slay Goliath with conventional weapons. We had found our slingshot, direct action.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's great to be with you all. So thank you for having us. On behalf of all the panelists, thank you, Regina, for organizing this. So the context in which I wanted to start is talking about the question, why do people do direct action in the first place? So I want to tell a story about how Jethro and I got involved in the Casino Free Philadelphia campaign, which happened here over the course of sort of 2006 to continuing even to today. But I want to talk about it just by going back in history a little bit, which is in 2004, the governor, Ed Rendell at the time, had a masterful plan to bring in casinos into the state of Pennsylvania. And he did it by, there was a 33-line bill that happened to be totally unrelated to casinos, about racetrack and the horse racing industry. Had nothing to do with casinos, was read 3 times publicly, as they have to be in the State House. And then in the middle of the night, 4th of July weekend, this is in 2004, the 33 lines were stripped, except for one word, whereas, and a 146-page amendment was added, which said the introduction of 55,000 slots into the state of Pennsylvania, the largest introduction of casino gambling that had ever happened anywhere in American soil. So there's no public input, no public debate. The state Supreme Court said that the bill itself had been read publicly 3 times, because those 33-line bills that had been read publicly 3 times, and therefore it was legal to do this particular maneuver. Also around that time, the State House granted the judges a pay increase. That was very controversial. So there's a lot of questions of insider dealing, corruption. It certainly smelled corrupt, and if you talk to sort of a lot of reporters, they would say, yeah, we probably think there's corruption in there, but we're probably not going to be able to get into it. But nevertheless, the public was locked out. That's the reason why people turn to direct action. That's the heart of it, is when people are trying to use the official institutions, the official channels, and are locked out. So I'm talking to many lawyers, so I'm aware of that. And so one example of that was a few months later, Jethro and I were working together, and we had tried to get documents. There had been these various casino plans that had been put out to 5 different locations, and we wanted casino site plans. So we wanted to know what was, for example, being built 200 feet from Jethro's house. Site plans, architectural renderings, traffic plans, impact studies, social impact studies, environmental plans, crime impact studies, the kinds of things that would be reasonable for someone to have access to in updated form. And the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board absolutely refused to release any of these documents. There's over a dozen Freedom of Information Act requests or right to know requests under the PA Sunshine Law and other laws here in Pennsylvania. And the Pennsylvania Game Control Board was allowed to say no because they had what's called quasi-judicial status. So, in other words, people like Jethro, neighbors, citizens, weren't able to get updated plans about these massive casinos that were being built, even while we were being told there's a public debate going on. So, we recognized that in that context, the public was being locked out. And what we felt is that's not right. It's not right for the public to not have meaningful input on a casino planning process or on any other process. And this isn't just about casinos, but it's about a broader issue of access to democracy. So the question is, how do you get that access? So what we did is we launched a campaign called Operation Transparency. And the campaign itself had a fairly simple goal. So we went to City Hall, down to City Hall, and asked, I shouldn't say asked, we read an ultimatum that was to the governor and to the head of the Gaming Control Board. And the ultimatum was very simple, which said, we want access to all of these documents, site plans, environmental plans, etc. We want access by all of these documents to be made public on your website so that everybody can see them by December 1st at high noon. All politics is theater, so we're just joining the theater. So we want it by December 1st at high noon. If we don't get those documents by December 1st at high noon, we will be forced to go to the Gaming Control Board headquarters and to release those documents ourselves, to take them, to what we called liberate them, to free them up. So the if this, then that was very clear for the public to understand, which was we should get access to these documents. Makes sense, right? Yes? So we should be able to get access to these documents. If we don't get access to these documents, then we'll do the right thing ourselves, which is to go and take those documents ourselves, to go to their offices and so forth. And we're aware of several things. One, we're aware of this is an interesting statement, and people immediately say, well, how will you do that? That makes it a good press story. It makes it a good press narrative in terms of the media because it has an unknown ending. It's like a good mystery novel, which is you don't know how it's going to turn out. Therefore, you want to know, well, what happens when you did it? And it's also a clear way to organize because what we began to do was leading up to that big, bold action on December 1st that we had sort of put out there, we did these smaller actions. So we did what we think of as small symbolic actions. So those were street theater. For example, we went to the Pennsylvania Game Control Board and we washed their windows to help them become more transparent. So each action like that led to us being a chance to organize people, get more people on board, begin to tell more people about it. Originally when we started, it was just really Jethro and I and sort of a handful of folks, and so we started to grow our numbers bit by bit. So I just want to contrast some of direct action. I think if we're using that in a broad sense of that term, some kinds of direct action are illegal in that sense, but I think one way to cut it isn't so much as legal, illegal. Another way to cut it is symbolic actions, so that washing the windows, it was just it was symbolism. Or another symbolic action is we went to their headquarters because they began to say, well, we'll release some of these documents at our offices. So we went into their offices and we asked all of them for their documents. It turned out they wouldn't give us anything. And so we came out with a press conference and we wore these data mining hats. So we were data miners searching for information. Again, it was just symbolism. It was street theater in that way. But it's theater to expose, to sort of show the ridiculousness of the situation. And it was to organize around. Some people found it fun, engaging. But I want to contrast that kind of symbolic action with what might be thought of as sort of a realm of non-cooperation or alternative cooperation, where what we were doing wasn't the document search where we were going to go into these offices and take these documents ourselves. That's not symbolic. That's actually a literal achievement of our goal. That is to say, if we were successful in releasing those documents by going to their offices and pulling them out and then making them public, we would achieve our goals. That's not symbolism. I just want to contrast those two types of actions as thinking about direct action. And that we think both can be very useful and very powerful, and we were using them in a campaign right next to each other. So the first set of actions were a series of symbolic actions that led up to that December 1st deadline. So on December 1st, the Game Control Board calls me and they say, look, we've got maybe a third of the documents released. And we said, look, we've given you a month and a half, reasonable amount of time to get all these documents released. You haven't done it. We've asked for full transparency. We've been fully transparent with you. So we want you to do the right thing. You didn't do the right thing, so we'll have to do the right thing for you. So we'll have to go to the gaming controlled offices and release these documents. So a week later, December 9th, we do a nonviolent direct action training. December 10th, we do the nonviolent search and seizure. Have fun with it. All of this is reflecting a different relationship to power. And all of this reflects what's fundamentally how we believe power flows differently than I think a lot of people do. So a lot of people, I think, have a notion of power, which is those at the top have the most amount of authority. So the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, for example, is all-encompassing about what the laws look like, how the laws are implemented. And then it goes on down. Or the CEO of a company, they're actually the person who has the most amount of power. We think there's another way of looking at power, which is instead of power flowing downwards from the top down, power flows upwards. That is by consent. So folks in Otpor, who's a movement who's involved in overthrowing Milosevic, one of the ways they talked about it, they said, look, by themselves, rulers do not milk cows, build bridges, keep up trash. They do not exchange currency. The people do these things. And if the people refuse to continue to do these things, those operations, then the rulers themselves cannot rule. So the understanding is that it's actually at the grassroots level by consent of going along with things that people actually, that these systems continue to move forward. So we look at it that way. And part of our consent in that moment was, do we allow the Gaming Control Board to look like it has legitimacy and credibility? Or do we reduce its legitimacy and its credibility by exposing it for being anti-democratic in the way it's operating, expose it for being not helpful for the citizenry, and reduce its credibility by treating it the way we should treat our government? That's our relationship, that's our notion of power, which is it's ours. And therefore we can relate to it in a different way. Which is one reason why that question of legal, what's legal or not legal, is less in our mindset, sometimes when I'm doing action, than the question of what is the right thing to do? What is the proper thing to do? What is the morally justified thing to do? And so those of you who are lawyers, I'm so glad there are lawyers out there who can be helpful on the question of, well, that's not technically legal, but what we're especially looking for is the question of how do you build new kinds of relationships, new kinds of structures? And activists are consistently at the forefront of doing that because we're not bound to how structures are currently implemented. We're not studying how are they currently implemented, we're studying what should they look like? What should the new relationships be like? So we begin experiments. I just mark it. In India, for example, the access to information is much higher than in this country. So it's not just freedom of information. You can go to almost any Indian government official, and you can get access to basic information, the kind of information we're looking for. We don't have those kinds of laws here in the United States. And one reason we don't have those kinds of laws, I believe, is because we don't have the kind of citizenry who assumes we should have that kind of right and then implements it. So that's part of what we're doing. So I'll just give you a quick description of what happened when we did the nonviolent search and seizure. Since people were very curious, reporters began calling us saying, well, what will happen? What do you think will happen? And we said, well, we don't know. We were very coy. We played very coy about it. I don't know. You'll just have to show up. So the way you carry out nonviolent search and seizure, because I know many of you want to do this someday. So the way that you carry this out is you go to the location. So in this case, the Gaming Control Board office, which is in Harrisburg. And we did a little gathering outside with our people and brought like 14-foot tall magnifying glasses and so forth, just as props. And then proceed where we lined up. There's about 14 of us who were willing to do the nonviolent document search itself, about 80 people who were there supporting. And we had about 14 people who were willing to do the document search, lining up 2 by 2. I don't know why 2 by 2, Noah's Ark style or something. So 2 by 2, and what they did is they proceeded to read a citizen search warrant. Access to information is basic to democracy. Without access to information, you do not have a meaningful democracy. So we're living into the nonviolent search and seizure style. 2 people read the citizen search warrant and began walking forward into the offices. At that point, the Gaming Control Board shut down their building and closed these offices so people couldn't get in. So 2 by 2, people continued to sort of line up, read this as a search warrant, and line up. And police came. Police had known, because of course we've been very open about it. So we asked the police to do their job, which would be to assist us in releasing those documents. The police, some of you might be shocked, didn't do that particular job. Instead, they decided to arrest us. So 14 of us were arrested. We were cited with disorderly conduct. Just fast forwarding really quick, we did eventually go before a judge. The judge absolutely threw out the case, damning the Gaming Control Board, and said, just almost went as far as saying, I invite you back. And the way he said it, he said, if you guys don't release these kinds of documents, and I don't see what it is that you have up there that you need to keep secret like this. Because unless you're a defense agency, I don't see why you need to be this kind of secretive. Unless you guys do this, you're going to get more of these kinds of actions. Very much invitational, not guilty. And the whole drama was being watched by media, was being watched by public, was being watched by politicians, who politicians aren't really leaders, they're followers, politically speaking. And so they followed us and finally at that point began to start to stand up to the Game Control Board and say, you're not running a good system. So it wasn't a full win in the sense that we didn't get everything we wanted about no casinos. That's why there's a whole book on this thing. But the reason that we were able to win huge amounts was because of the arc of that storyline. And in fact, the Game Control Board, under pressure, released about 95% of the documents that we wanted. So direct action can win, direct action can work, and direct action is what we turn to when all the other channels are closed to us. Thank you.